When we tread the path, when we become experienced on the way, the middle path, the path up the mountainside, not up the cliff face, it's not a path at all. The path up the mountain of initiation, we constantly cry out for a reassessment of our spiritual values. We have in this college on many occasions issued our list of spiritual values as we have assessed them, and I'm sure you have copies of these lists. But we need to refresh our memory as to what is on the list from time to time, because our senses change. Our view from the mountain path becomes more exhilarating, and what we see changes our viewpoint. And so our attitude to spiritual values is a dynamic one, always in a state of change and motion. Amongst those spiritual values which fall under the heading of pertaining to the mental body, we have that one which we call perseverance. Our perseverance has a deliberately different pronunciation in terms of psychiatric terms. There is what we call perseverance. We're calling it perseverance, and we're referring to the spiritual value of perseverance. Tibetan monks were often taught in ancient times and modern times to meditate under a large tolling bell, to learn to ignore the sound of the bell and turn inwards. And if they could do this, this was indeed a valid testimony that they had, as it were, withdrawn from the senses. They were no longer using the sense of hearing because they had turned inwards. And this detachment from the sound of the bell spread, so that it was a detachment from the other senses. And it was a detachment eventually from the Raja of the senses, that which elaborates thought. And so it was a comforting thing to be able to do, to be able to sit under the bell and yet not to notice or heed its loud clangs. It could be taken as proof positive that the meditator had ignored his senses, had in fact virtually cut off the sources of his thought forms, always remembering what Madame Blavatsky said of the mind as the Raja of the thoughts. The mind is the slayer of the real, and whilst it elaborates its thoughts, it slays the real, hides the real, shuts the real off, shuts higher manas off. Now, we don't have a tolling bell in the West, nor do we expect to put one up. We couldn't stand that form of experience. But what we have instead of the tolling bell is constant interruption. It is part of our life. And if we were to approach this matter of interruptions sensibly, we would see it as the tolling bell, and learn that we have to put up with the tolling bell of our interruptions. Indeed, were those interruptions not there, we would not be incarnated in the subrace. We would be in Tibet under the tolling bell. But we have reached a level of development in which we must be faced with constant interruptions, so that we have to concentrate harder despite those interruptions. That's part of the emerging nature of our subrace, to learn to concentrate harder despite the interruptions, to find energy to meet the demands of the stress, and I've talked about that enough before. And so interruptions pose a challenge to us. We should be able to find that challenge clearly demarcated in the horoscope, interruptions. Now, if we have such interruptions, and we can disassociate ourselves from them, or manage them in some way in our consciousness, it improves our concentration, but only if we persevere with this. And that is one of the spiritual values I want to impress upon you today, is perseverance. The ability to persevere in the face of interruption strengthens the will, strengthens the will. Now, we have seen from our earlier studies that strengthening the will has many applications. We have learnt that will is important in astral projection. We have learnt that all of us have will, but that we vary greatly in our ability to exercise that will, to maintain it, to concentrate, in fact. We have seen that if we can hold the concentration in the city known as astral projection, it can determine even the length of the projection that is possible. And if you can project 3,000 miles, you need at least 6 seconds of applied concentration, applied will in the form of concentration. We don't get our bits and pieces together enough. We blather along on the path and stop and examine the heather on the cliffside and get distracted by the walls. Many will say, "Oh, I must have seclusion to meditate in." Nonsense. If you needed that kind of seclusion, you would have taken an appropriate body that had given you seclusion. Perhaps an igloo in the North Pole would be appropriate for you. Constant seclusion and denial of interruption is something that negates the strengthening of the will. It negates the strengthening of the will. And we at this college have been taught always not to see things as adverse, but rather as a challenge. The person with squares in the horoscope is a person who should be delighted that his soul should evaluate him so highly as to pose so many challenges in the horoscope, or intercepted signs, or whatever they may be. Challenges are challenges, and interruptions are one of these sorts of challenges. Socrates was once asked by a disciple where was the best place to begin studying the sacred sciences. Socrates answered him instantly. He said, "Where you are." And he might well have added, "Where you are and right now is where you should begin to study the sacred sciences." He himself was never disconsolate because of the difficulties of his environment. On one occasion, during a campaign, He served as a hoplite, an ordinary foot soldier in the Athenian army, and even then he could withdraw himself during the winter of their campaign. He could withdraw himself and stand aside and meditate in the snow that was falling, to the amazement of his comrades. Go into a deep reverie with the snow falling all around him and his feet clothed only in sandals. And so we should, in searching out for spiritual values, take into account many things. The nature of our subrace, the way that it is involved as the avant-garde of the planet. And the avant-garde should, of course, always set an example. If it is in disorder itself, well, what would you expect those who follow to practice? Nothing but the same sort of behavior, being disconsolate in the face of stress. Socrates also said, in all things, not too much. In all things, not too much. He did not say, cut out your vices. He himself admitted that in his life he had probably been into all the vices, but that he could say that having been challenged by these vices, he had taken the challenge up and had conquered them. How often haven't we remarked that a person who is not challenged by a vice cannot pass an opinion on it? I myself often feel somewhat conscience-stricken telling people to give up smoking. I've never smoked. I don't know what it's like. I have puffed a cigar on occasions way back in the past, partly because I like the smell of it. But I really can't say how hard it is to give up smoking once that you have become habituated. In all things, not too much. In other words, he provides a cue. He suggests that rather than cut a thing out altogether, completely and utterly, at least it would be better, perhaps, to reduce it if it is too much. I think one of the examples of this is exercise. Of course, by now, you would have observed some of the follies that are associated with exercise. How ridiculous to see people mounted on a bicycle in a bedroom or a studio or a gymnasium somewhere, pedaling away like hell because they don't feel in trim. It means that somewhere down the line they've got their order of values wrong. They shouldn't be in a position whereby they have to work off something or the other on a pointless exercise. They should have worked off whatever it is in something creative and useful to mankind or to themselves. And as for exercising just for the hell of it, well, that's just beyond me altogether. People get their priorities mixed up. And this idea that the physical body must be the supreme consideration and that it must look trim at all times. Yes, it has a degree of importance, but not the most important thing. Far more important to trim the intellect, trim the emotions, and fertilize the intellect. Zen monks teach that no man should walk unless he's going somewhere. To go out jogging just for the sake of jogging and perhaps to keep fit seems to me that the person's got his priorities all mixed up. I could think of 1,000 ways in which you could become involved in exercise for the good of mankind rather than just jogging for the sake of a fit physical body. And all this nonsense about physical fitness producing an alert mind and so on. It's all the wrong way round. Years ago, I used to pace up and down when I was pondering over some problem. If I was trying to get something into my brain for an examination, I can't tell how many professional exams I had to write. I used to pace up and down and brood and ponder, go for walks in the park and hammer it in. And it seemed to help. But then, of course, it was at a time when I didn't know where I was going. I didn't really know whether having degrees after your name meant anything, nor did I know why I had to do the damn things, but it was part of a rigmarole I had to go through. And so I used to pace up and down when I was struggling to absorb things. Today I don't do it anymore. I do it much better. Sitting quietly, putting my stuff together despite dozens of interruptions. And people who know me know what those interruptions are like. Students of the esoteric are not expected to excel in muscular exercise. It's not expected of you. That you should maintain your physical body, yes. That you should not neglect it, certainly. But not that you should be involved in competitive sport. Solon, the great lawgiver, was once asked to go to the games with a friend. Would he please go to the games and observe this great Greek athlete there? His friend told him that this man could swim like a fish, he could jump like a deer, and he could run like a hare. And Solon declined with thanks. And he declared that it was not seeming that a man should imitate animals, that he should himself, or that this other man should run like a hare, jump like a horse, and so on. But if, on the other hand, at the games, they had there a man who could think like the gods, oh, he would gladly go to the games, if there was such a man there. I always think of the great decathlon, the person who somehow or the other is able to do well in just about everything. We all think it's so wonderful. They have to be of a special kind of build and guts and stamina and so on. But my heavens, you see them 5 years later after they've won the decathlon. They've gone to seed. Very noble thing from the point of view of competitive sport. But that person could be involved in thinking like the gods. And it would be preserved forever. Preserved forever. He would be depositing in a cosmic bank such a capacity. This is what we mean when we talk about Christ's spiritual values. Philosophers, just like students of the esoteric, are always seeking for eternal existence, not temporary considerations. I'm unfit. I'm going to jog every morning for a year. That's priorities are wrong. We seek for eternal existences, not just the mere heyday of physical fitness which comes and is soon over. I remember a very lovely person in the group here, in the audience today. When she first considered coming to Claregate, was concerned primarily with whether she would miss her fresh air for that day. She's a very lovely person, and a very creative and useful person, but I'm sure she hasn't got her priorities quite in that order today. Slightly different. Sometimes she has to put up with stuffiness in this room and shut the traffic out like today. The person on the path strives for release. He strives for release from impermanent things. And what if we spend all our lives building up respect for things that are impermanent, that are going to be taken away from you? Impermanent habits, impermanent attitudes, current beliefs. Yes, it's embarrassing. We're often talking about previous lives. But to know previous lives and to review some of the attitudes that you had in those previous lives, heavens, that can be very embarrassing indeed. To think how you and I gave ourselves to Christian belief and bled for it, and went on crusades for it, and slaughtered for it, and burnt at the stake for it. We think of those attitudes today. We know how foolish we were to be caught up in such extremities and atrocities. The middle path. The middle path. The person on the path seeks the attitudes of his soul, and he must be prepared to negate his own attitudes in order to manifest the attitude of his soul. And that's very hard indeed. The eternal patterns of cosmic consciousness, not personality consciousness. And of course we don't know outright immediately what cosmic consciousness is, and therefore the attitudes of one capable of cosmic consciousness. But we have a very fine literature on the subject. We have excellent traditions, and we have age-old sciences that teach us the nature of eternal attitudes and patterns of cosmic consciousness. And all the time when we seek for these more enduring things, we use perseverance, so that it is one of the most valuable of the spiritual gifts. We grow, and our integrity blossoms as we exercise that perseverance for eternal things. We regard these values as more important than any physical reward, material reward, or anything that is given to us that is transient. And so we learn to detach through perseverance with things that are worth it, eternal and valuable. We eventually learn to detach ourselves from the inconsequential. We haven't set out to detach ourselves. We have practiced perseverance with things eternal, and detachment comes. We must learn to watch for the inconsequential and ignore it. Discussions and controversies that rage around and will be past and gone and dead and buried before long. Don't get caught up in them and waste your energies on them. Things like cup finals and the memoranda, or trying to think of the word now, of political parties. What do they call it? The manifestos of political parties. They all come and go. And more than anything, learn to practice your virtues inside you, where you are. Don't say, well, I'm save my virtues for when I'm at Claregate on a Sunday and I can show them off there. Try and practice them wherever you are. That's very hard. It's no good being virtuous in a mountain cave where nobody is in any contact with you. The virtues are very beautiful things, and they should be shared. And perseverance is the thing that brings these virtues out. And so we say, persevere with things that are esoterically significant. Get out of old habits, such as, oh, I must get my degree in Spanish. Without a degree, I'm not going to be anything in the world. Those times are gone. They've gone. We're living in changed times. There are 2 million people in this country who will never work again. Think of that. Times are changing. And this idea that we must have the rubber stamp of formal education, that's gone. Persevere in things that can reflect to your credit in a cosmic bank. The exercising of things like compassion. And above all, learn to persevere with the soul's purpose. And so we say that the thing that would please your soul, the soul, more than anything, if you persevered with it, is meditation. There are things unwritten about the science of meditation. Things that are not even understood about it. People like myself who are frontiersmen, propounding meditation, we know that somehow meditation alters the blood supply to the brain. So that when the body is showing a low blood activity, the blood pressure is average or low, the head is swollen and inflamed with enriched, gorged blood vessels, so that the whole head is red. We know that under those circumstances, neurons, new nerve tissue is being formed. We don't agree that we progressively lose all our ganglionic tissue, our brain tissue, as we age. We say that the process can at least be stopped and even reversed, so that some of the most creative people can be creative into old age. And we have talked about the role of the outer major chakra in this reversal. We have even said that the whole shape of the brain can be altered under meditation, persistent meditation. So we say persevere with things like meditation. And always remember that when the body is in a state of great change, whether it is in disease or whether it is under extreme exercise or duress, it throws off toxins, poisons. The harder you work, the more poisons are elaborated. Doesn't that sound better than the harder you exercise on your bicycle in your gymnasium, the more toxins are produced? The harder you work, the more toxins are produced. The sicker you are, the more toxins are produced. But you know, it doesn't end there. Just as the body throws off its toxins, when we're sick and needs purifying, so too does the soul throw off its poisons. And we call these poisons discarded by the soul, we call them disturbances and crises. And we have discovered empirically from sheer observation of facts that those who tread the path immediately are involved in unending crisis. It is characteristic of treading the path, and it is because the soul is shedding, is discarding, with as much surety as the physical body discards its toxins. It is casting off elements of the unwanted and what we call disturbances, psychological disturbances, aberrations in our dream life, vrittis, and so on. Now, a soul cannot work through any personality that does not persevere. The personality of the soul is fleeting enough. Fleeting enough. A 70-year life is just a fleeting moment in the life of a soul. But if that personality, which is useless usually until about the age of 28 anyway, and not much good after the age of 75, and if in the intervening period between the two extremes the personality cannot persevere in anything, then it's just like a kaleidoscope of events to the soul. It's just a flickering. So there must be periods in which you persevere on certain things. These are some of the disturbances which you should recognize happily and face up to as being signs that the soul is excreting, shedding its poisons. Your relationships with others. Some of the relationships that you used to regard as important, if not valuable, begin to lose their attraction for you. Friends that you have grown up with, even friends that you have fought in battles in the war with, even these sometimes are relationships which you must discard. You cannot manage them any longer. We grow too old for narrow creeds of right and wrong. We eventually don't care what they think of the career. Whether you have made it or whether you haven't, you don't care anymore. And so this is one of the disturbances that we have to face in our relationships with others. And new relationships develop, and they can be disturbing too. The relationship with the group. And to have to face somebody who you can't bear and you choose to ignore usually, and now the devil's in the group. And you have to face him in the group. And for the sake of the group you have to swallow hard and don't allow yourself to get riled by him, because he's part of the group and you want the group to succeed. These things are important. They may sound very mundane, but they're frightfully important. And you as a group, if I may say so, have chased off some people because of your attitudes. With all the love in the world, I tell you that. learn to recognize that relationships are always changing once you become spiritually aware, and they can be a site of great disturbances and crises. And then there's the matter of finance. Finance is part and parcel of it. And I have not elaborated this observation. I'm quoting from the work that I gave you last week, Self-Unfoldment by Manly Palmer Hall. And he has observed that financial matters seem to surface, whereas you've managed finances very well. Maybe you could be earning more than before, and yet the matter of finance becomes objectionable. It's thrown to the surface. It becomes a source of disturbance. Not perhaps even your own finances, but the finances of the group. They are part and parcel of the soul's excretion, learning to cope with new responsibilities. Esoteric people always seem to be broke, always seem to be poor, and it's universal, not confined here, except to some parts of America where the voice of a group is governed by those that feed the money into it. That's not an esoteric group at all. You see, the wise man doesn't desire wealth. And when you don't desire wealth like you used to, you tend not to protect it and nurture it and be concerned for it so much. And that's one of the causes of disturbance and crises with regard to money. The wise man prefers peace and contentment and security and the freedom to be able to disseminate his soul. And these are a far cry from using every hour and minute of the day usefully to bring in an income. Another way in which the soul shows its toxins is through temperament. We develop new temperaments when we tread the path. Sometimes they show as grouchiness, when in fact all we're trying to do is to put up a screen and say, leave me alone for an hour, I must have an hour to myself. So we put up a screen. It's really quite a harmless screen. It just says that, give me privacy for an hour, and then I'll take my screen down. We change in temperament. We have to have things like privacy. And so our temperaments can be a cause, a source of upset. Now, what we have said so far is, don't try so much to destroy evil around you. If you're going to be a destroyer of evil, you've got to be as hard as nails. You've got to have the right rays for it. There are very few people who can do that. Quite often the destroyer of evil has to adopt all sorts of masks to accomplish what he himself may not even know that he is set out to do. I'm thinking now of Hitler destroying the slums of East London. Rather than set out to destroy evil, it is much more the way of the middle path, to posit instead the good, to posit the good, to create nuclei of goodness. And it's much better for the new age to produce new nuclei of goodness, to back projects that are new in the dissemination of goodness, rather than old crystallized forms. I haven't any particular hate for the Salvation Army, but I can think of the Salvation Army immediately. It was a new thing 100 years ago, brilliantly conceived, adequate to the needs of the day, a focal point for goodness, but one thinks twice about it today. Much better to energize new points, nuclei of goodness, and let them grow and disseminate and send their feelers, tentacles throughout all society, rather than trying to destroy the evil. The evil will go if you can disseminate enough good. And secondly, with regard to the matter of changing, don't destroy the body. Don't destroy the body. I've heard a lot of arguments about fasting. I've heard a lot of arguments about going into retreat and hiding from the world and living as a community in which you have a pure note and are not confronted with such disgusting things as, shall we say, participating in patriotism and so on. Well, it's the general opinion of the leaders of the esoteric world that people who hide away in seclusion don't usually produce much, even esoterically. And fasting has its place, nobody denies that. Fasting has its place. It's good if you want to accelerate the discharge of poisons. Fasting is excellent, there's no doubt about that. But you can also see the way in which fasting can produce some very, very adverse things. The humiliation of the physical body is part of a lost age. It's part of the Piscean age. Flagellate the physical body. Clip its wings. Make it fast. Keep it under your grasp. But at what level? Must it come under the grasp of your will at this level, and therefore you will humiliate it, partly destroy it? Or is it much better to expand the will and to take the body as it is, grasp it by the scruff of the neck? Much better that way. When we concentrate on body destroying or body changing, the will escapes. The will has no exercise applied to it. It has lost a very useful discipline that could have been applied to it. This is not the age of asceticism. Posit rather increase in your own consciousness. That's much better. Rather than curtailing the physical body, try and increase the extent of your own consciousness. Extend it daily. You'll say, well, how can you do that? Quite easily. Meditate, study the classics, serve mankind. Those three things alone will extend the consciousness each day if you practice them. They have to, because they're exercising the three head chakras coordinatedly together. Extend your consciousness daily into everything around you. Into everything around you. Then you become more and more the expression of the one in whom you live and move and have your being. As I always say, not that we must live in this world less, but that we must live in both worlds more. We must live in both worlds more. So we say, don't try and destroy the vices. replace them. Don't activate them any further. If you do that, you can hurt the personality. We know this is true. Many examples of it. You just ask a person who has been smoking 40 cigarettes a day to stop like that. He will go into a physiological imbalance. He will have the effects of giving up tobacco express themselves through him physically, with all the mental and emotional factors as well. And some people can't bear it. How often hasn't a wife rung me up or said to me, you know, I appreciate what you're doing for John, and he's such a nice person, but since he's given up smoking, I can't bear to live with him. He is just intolerable. And of course, that is not what we're setting out to do. It's much better to reduce the smoking little by little each day, but instead to put your energies into the growth and dissemination of something more worthwhile in your nature. So we say, rather posit the virtues, introduce the virtues into your life, and there won't be enough energy to foster this desire for alcohol or cigarettes or whatever it is. And this is what we mean by the middle way. You have to do it where you are, as Socrates said. Do it where you are, and I say, do it immediately. St. Simeon sat for 40 years in the Libyan desert on the top of a column of rock, all by himself. It was so isolated that he had to draw his food up in a bucket. Useless austerity, useless austerity. Sitting there for 40 years, he was no damn good to himself and no damn good to anybody else. Meditation and isolation is well and good. Occasionally, no reason why we shouldn't. But always do a little together with others. Always do a little together with others. Then you can say, I'm moving with the times, I'm moving in the same direction as the one in whom I live and move and have my being. Because this is the Aquarian age of groups. And group meditation is important. Meditate in isolation by all means, but be certain to meditate in groups as well. Now there are many effects of meditation, but the one that we're concerned with today more than any is this one, that meditation hastens the emergence of the new set of spiritual values. It's one of these intangible things about meditation. It's like the pacemaker. It sets the pace for the emergence of your new sense of spiritual values. And just as I said earlier, when you examine your friends and you think of those that you used to mix with 20 years ago, without being snobbish, you just can't go on. New spiritual values have entered into you. Now, meditation, more than anything, encourages the expression of those spiritual values. We have made up a list of spiritual values in the past in this college. And of course, it is a long list, but I'm still going to take you through the list to remind you again of some of these values. There is that value of sensitivity to vibration. You can call it seeing the aura if you wish. We mean sensitivity to vibration, and ultimately the vibration of the Logos himself. Then there is the spiritual value which we associate with soul maturity. Are you demonstrating soul maturity? Are you able in the world to adopt an attitude of joy, even in the face of great adversity? Can you adopt an attitude of joy? Then there is the matter of asceticism. Have we on the one hand let it get out of hand so that we are turning our lives into an eccentricity with our fasting and with our asceticism? Or on the other hand, are we not able to practice any self-discipline or regulation at all? The middle path is what is required. Have we any kind of attitude towards the matter of initiation? If we were preparing for the medical profession, we would be very conscious of passing our finals. Are we ourselves preparing for the spiritual examinations which we call initiation? Have we a sufficient grasp that there is a divine plan for the earth, and that the masters are hard-pressed to implement it at this time, especially at this time, on the frontier of a new age? That's important. The belief in the divine plan. Are we concerned enough for that which we are responsible for as humanity, and that is the lower kingdoms of nature? Will we speak up for the voiceless millions of animals? Will we stand up for the conservation of natural things on our planet? Are we not perhaps too concerned with our own spiritual progress, worrying about whether we are doing enough for our own spiritual advancement? Or are we so stupid enough to be unconcerned at all with it, and so put off always the need to meditate regularly? And what about this matter of continuity of consciousness? Have we still got the same sleep habits that we had 20 years ago? You will know what I mean by that. Are we developing the qualities of subjective experience like intuition? Is our intuition really functioning, or is it tinged all the time with emotion and personal consideration? Can it really act in such a way as to flash through the truth without it being perverted by affect? Are we really setting ourselves targets each day not to be fooled by the unreal? Are we searching out for the real, distinguishing things that are real through their being eternal and having universal value for all time and in all dimensions? Are we practicing emotional control? Or are we filling the astral world with awful vibrations which encourage the dissemination, the growth there of man's worst instincts, and which are fed back into man, lower types of man? Are we aware of what epilepsy means? The knife-edge state between being absolutely awake and being turned inwards. Do we know what epilepsy means? the throwing of the focus of attention inwards rather than losing it in what we call sleep? Are we maintaining ourselves in the world from the point of view of being relevant? Many esoteric people switch the television off completely when the news is coming on. I watch every newsreel that I can possibly get to, so long as it isn't just a repeat. I try and remain relevant to the world's needs. Not only is it useful for me on the platform when somebody puts questions to me, but I need to stay relevant to the world's needs. Do you guard your thought content, aware of the fact that as you draw close to the Master, your thoughts become part of his thoughts? Are we capable of being happy on the one hand, and are we capable of setting happiness aside and saying, hell, that's not everything in life just to be happy? And say to ourselves, I can put aside happiness and I can go through with this project, even if it does make me unhappy or sad, or brings me into contact with the disastrous things of the world. Are you being honest with yourself? Are you just going through a set of actions which merely pay, as it were, respect to your personality and its aggrandizement? When you keep your spiritual diary, do you really throw your heart into it? Or do you just drag it out at the last moment and say, oh damn, I forgot to do it today? Being honest with yourself. Do you learn to identify yourself with the Master? And the way you learn to identify yourself with the Master is try to emulate him in every way possible. How would he deal with the situation that I'm confronted with in my life? In other words, following his example so that you can become his instrument. Do we identify ourselves enough with the planet, the one in whom we live and move and have our being? Can we feel his urgency, his needs, at all times, not just during meditation, but at all times? Do we still maintain some relevance to facts? Or are we becoming crazy? Are we becoming so distorted in our reasoning that Neptune is rampant in our horoscope? The importance and relevance of facts. Are we using any knowledge that we have of previous lives? Even if it comes to us in atavism, are we growing better because of this knowledge that we have of powers that are latent within us and which once expressed themselves in previous lives? And are we in fact really meditating each day, or just going through a performance and pretending? Are we writing our dreams down? Are we making inroads into this difficult area of remembering dreams? Are we developing our critical faculty of dreams? Or are we just neglecting them and then picking up the diary in the morning and getting the gist of them down? Well, I could go on, but I won't. I have gone through half the list. That is something that I believe all of you should have pasted in onto the flyleaf of your diaries. The Claregate College list questionnaire as regards your spiritual values. We all admit and know that perfection is reserved for the gods. We know that. We don't expect perfection, nor do the masters. And that is a strange but true fact. People walk around believing that the masters think that you are perfect, and that every second of the day you are under watch, and that you should be absolutely immaculate in everything you do, even if it's a case of letting service work go to hell. Don't get that idea at all. We are imperfect gods. We are gods in the making. Accept the fact and adjust accordingly. The average person is not without faults. But where we have faults, we should at least profit from the mistakes we make through them. We should profit from the mistakes that we make. And always remember, plant virtues in their place. Now, we're going to be giving out a list of spiritual values. And I'm going to ask you to take this list of spiritual values home with you. They are related to the three bodies: the mental, the emotional, and the physical. And you are asked to rate yourself out of 10 for each of the items. For instance, with regard to the mental body, you will ask to rate yourself out of 10 as to what sort of degree of continuity you have in your life. How do you maintain your spiritual diary? Is there continuity in doing that?